BC's film industry is bracing as a strike by actors in the U.S. begins today. Couple that with a months-long writer's strike, and the slowdown has been ongoing already. How is it all affecting you? And how has the era of streaming changed things for people who work in film and television? After 12:30, our pets column is back, and this time we'll talk about horses. They're such beautiful and beloved creatures. We'll be joined by an equestrian to take your questions on training, behavior, and care. I'm Michelle Eliot. This is BC Today. Hollywood film and TV actors are on strike today. They're joining the writers who were already off the job to create the biggest walkout in more than 40 years. 160,000 performers stopped work at midnight Pacific time. The move has effectively set off an industry-wide shutdown, including here in BC. And as reporter Deanna Sumanak-Johnson explains, actors want their contracts to keep up with all the recent changes in media.
Some of the key issues they're striking about: payment for actors when their work plays on streaming platforms, and limits on how studios can use artificial intelligence to reproduce actors' faces and voices. Big names like Matt Damon, Meryl Streep, and Jessica Chastain say they stand with their union, which is led by Fran Drescher.
If we don't stand tall right now, we are all going to be in trouble. We are all going to be in jeopardy. So we came together in strength and solidarity and unity with the largest strike authorization vote in our union's history.
Now, this strike on its own would be bad enough, but combined with the already ongoing writer's strike, it could bring Hollywood to its knees.
We have a greater purpose than any of us could have ever imagined.
Popular shows like The Last of Us and White Lotus could have their new seasons delayed by months. It's also bad news for thousands of Canadians who work on film sets in this country. If the film's lead actors are American, production would have to stop. We've already seen talk shows go into repeats because of writer's strike. Now, this could mean no new episodes or no new seasons of TV shows that were about to start production. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
Meanwhile, IATSE Local 891 is the union that represents more than 10,000 film workers here in BC. And they tell the CBC that about 80% of its members' work is on foreign productions. And they say this strike is unprecedented, and it's having a deep and direct effect on workers here. We're going to hear from one actor in just a moment. We also want to hear from you on the open line. If you work in BC's film industry, how is this strike and the writer's strike impacting you? And how has the streaming era changed things for the film and television industry? We'd like to hear from workers and from viewers too. You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, on your cell phone, star or pound 690. You can also send us an email, bctoday@cbc.ca. I'm joined here in studio by Jennifer Tong, a film and television actor based right here in Vancouver. Jennifer, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. What is the impact on you by the strike by actors in the U.S.?
Well, I mean, I think, the strike has definitely been a long time coming, and we've been sort of expecting it, but the gravity of it all really hit in the past couple days. In Vancouver, there's always a lot of production happening, but since the beginning of the year, things have definitely been slow. I think in preparation of the WGA strike, the Writers Guild strike, before it even happened a couple months ago, things were already starting to slow down. And so I think actors in the city, including myself, like a lot of us haven't been able to work for a while, and it's scary not knowing when your next paycheck is going to come.
I'm sure it is. What do you make of the issues that the actors have been raising? Things like the residual pay, the way that streaming has changed things, use of AI. What do you make of that?
I mean, I think everything they're saying is super valid. The way we consume media nowadays has changed so drastically, so that, like contracts that were valid before, like they just don't work for people anymore. I have a show that's on Netflix, and, we don't see any of the residuals that are, coming from that. And networks are very, opaque about their numbers. And so we don't know, like, if the show's doing well, if it's not, and they get to just use our image and play that show over and over again without us getting anything. And, that's, I think, making it really hard for actors to make a living nowadays.
Now, you're not a member of that union, the Screen Actors Guild. What's it like for BC actors?
So, I'm a part of the UBCP union here in BC, and because the, BC film industry and the Hollywood film industry is so closely linked, there's a direct impact. A lot of most productions that are filmed in BC are from the States. And so if those stop, there's not really any work for Vancouver actors.
Wow. And so what do you think that says about our industry and how reliant we are on the U.S.?
I mean, I have been kind of vocal about Canadian content in the past couple months. I went to the Canadian Screen Awards, which I was so happy to be able to attend. But it was just, shocking to see shows like The Porter that was, nominated for, I think, something wild, like 19 CSAs. And I think they won like 12.
Very acclaimed, yeah.
But they weren't able to do a second season because they were canceled. And, I was a part of a show called Fakes, and on CBC Gem and Netflix. And we were also nominated for Best Comedy Series, but we were canceled. So it's kind of like it really made clear to me that there's such a, small margin of Canadian content that is allowed to thrive and succeed. And I'm just like, we need more funding, and we need, network and producers to like believe in Canadian content so we can keep telling our stories, because there's a lot of talent here.
Oh, you bring up some really interesting points there about how interlaced our industry is with the United States and what that means for our actors here in BC. Jennifer Tong is with me, an actor based here in Vancouver in film and television, and we're asking you about that Hollywood actors strike that starts today, but of course there's been the writers strike as well that started months ago. With BC's extensive industry and how reliant it is on the U.S., as you've heard, what impact is it having on you? And whether you're a viewer or you work in the industry, how has streaming changed things for film and television? We'd love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, on your cell phone, star or pound 690. And let's take a call. Deborah is on the line on Salt Spring Island. Hi, Deborah. Welcome. Do you work in film?
I do. I've been on your show before. Thanks for having me again. I'm a freelance film and television executive. I also teach. What I'm finding interesting about this first of all, I support wholeheartedly the issues that both of these organizations are striking about. But what will be interesting to see, as your previous caller mentioned, a lot of the production that's done in BC and in Ontario, certain other provinces, have enjoyed being service producing for American productions. We've honed our craft, we've made good money, but often it's at the expense of our Canadian production. And I think the issues that are at hand here with this particular strike are very much important to the Canadian industry people as well. So it'll be interesting to see whether that means more Canadian productions because, we're not on strike, or whether that will come up in negotiations with groups and organizations that are Canadian-based.
Wow. Tell me a little bit more about your work, Deborah.
Well, as a freelancer, you're a hired gun. So I've enjoyed working for the big ones, Warner Brothers, HBO, etc., all those people, but also working for CBC and CTV and some of the smaller Canadian productions. So there is a huge difference. The budgets are smaller.
Right.
You don't have the deep pockets if something goes south, to fix something. But it doesn't mean that the people aren't as less talented or those stories are important to be told.
It almost sounds, you're talking about the impact, but it almost sounds like you feel like there might be an opportunity here.
Well, I don't. I don't mean to make it sound that icky, but maybe it's more of just an awareness, as your previous caller has said, that, perhaps a little more attention and funding can be put to domestic productions.
Okay. Deborah, anything else you want to add?
No, let's just hope that, as I said, a lot of groups and organizations are watching this because they're very, very important issues. Writers' rooms have shrunk. Budgets are getting smaller, even on the larger U.S. productions. And I think the whole AI thing is important, as well as the residuals. A lot of creatives, and that's including writers and composers, designers, they rely on the residuals. They get paid a small fee for one episode, the episodes that they work on, but they make their money on residuals. And in Europe, it's recognized as a creative, and there isn't so much of a problem. So I'm really hoping that this is being resolved for the betterment of everybody, especially those creatives, and all the crew and the support industries who are suffering right now as well.
Yeah. Deborah, thanks so much for calling back. You take care, okay?
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. That's Deborah on Salt Spring Island. You were nodding there, Jennifer, especially when she was talking about there's talent here and stories to be told.
Absolutely. And I think that there is a weird thinking around LA actors versus Vancouver actors or Canadian actors. I was on a Zoom callback with some LA producers, and, I did my read for them, and they were almost shocked that I was so funny or that they were impressed by
Canadians
my
are funny.
performance. And I was like, yeah, we're here and we're, talented and we're ready to work. And there's just a weird thinking about it. And I don't know exactly where it comes from, but yeah, Vancouver and Canadian talent they're just so good, and I wish that it would be recognized more.
Well, that's what Deborah was talking about, awareness perhaps of that potential. And so the question of funding comes into play there. Let's take another call here. This is BC Today here on CBC. We are on radio, CBC Radio 1, 88.1 FM in Metro Vancouver, and we are live streaming as well. Welcome to you watching us on YouTube. You can see us on CBC Vancouver's page and on our website, cbc.ca/BC. and on CBC Gem as well, asking you, how is the actors' strike in the U.S. affecting you if you work in BC's film industry? And whether you're a viewer or a worker, how has that streaming era, the new era of streaming, changed things, do you think, for film and television? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 on your cell phone, star or pound 690. We're going to hear from an arts writer as well in just a moment to talk about the big context around this too. But right now, Rob is joining us from Vancouver. Hi there, Rob. Welcome to the show.
Hi. I used to work a little bit in film, and I know people who do. And echoing other points, we have a very good music industry in Canada, and it's not by happenstance. It's policy helped a lot. We have CanCon for all of our radio stations. They got to play, I think it's around 20% of CanCon. My understanding is we don't have that for TV, and we certainly don't have that for movie theaters. I know those are less relevant now. I don't think we have that for the streamers either. We have requirements for television around funding, and I think that's, correct me if I'm wrong, someone, I think that's what they're doing for streaming as well. So, okay, they're going to fund these productions, and that means, they'll hopefully air them. But it's not as effective as what we did with music. Imagine if 20% of the TV we watched was Canadian. If in Canada, 20% of the content from any streaming service qualified as Canadian, if 20% of all movie showtimes in the theaters were Canadian, we'd have a stronger industry. And why would that matter? We would be more insulated when there's a labor disruption in another jurisdiction, We wouldn't be so reliant on, everything being through SAG, for example. There'd be more things through UBCP.
Which is the union that Jennifer is a part of. Rob, thank you very much for that call. Take care.
People can email their politicians and push for a change, because policy affects us day to day. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, it's a good discussion to have around policy. Thanks so much for the call. And I'm joined here in studio by actor Jennifer Tong. And we have someone joining us now who can perhaps give us some more context into that, how reliant we are on the United States. What are the requirements when it comes to streaming and television? And we're going to be talking about that a little bit more than with our next guest. But 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 are our phone numbers. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. Let's bring in now Rachel Ho, who's a film critic and editor at Exclaim magazine. Rachel, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me again. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Rachel. We actually know each other, so
Oh,
hello.
of course you do. It is a small industry, isn't it?
Sure is.
There you go. Well, Rachel, perhaps I'll go to you on that. What are the requirements? Rob compared it to the music industry, but what do television stations and streaming services need to provide when it comes to Canadian content?
I think what he said about, building up the Canadian industry so that we are insulated, like to use his exact words. I think that that's such a great idea. And that is true for many different economies or in many different industries within Canada. And it's a shame that we're so reliant upon the Americans, upon Hollywood, upon, especially over there in BC. It really is a shame that's become the situation. But, right now there's such a pivot in the industry. There's such a change going on. And it's the same change that was happening in the 80s and 90s. It's just different elements today. So it makes sense that they're having a problem finding a resolution because a pretty big change needs to happen in terms of the new agreement.
And from the CRTC, it says the CRTC frameworks mandate that the CBC plays a particular role in providing diverse Canadian content. Requirements for content made by Canadians on independent services vary and are set by conditions of license. Let me just push back on that idea with you both, because whether it's Canadian crew and film actors or US, aren't they the same issues? Wouldn't you have the same issues being faced by people here and perhaps run into those similar disputes?
I mean, I think whatever American unions are currently fighting for and whatever they do decide to agree upon is going to set a huge precedent for unions everywhere. Like I said before, we're so closely interlinked that, a lot of what is going to be decided over there is going to definitely affect us here.
Okay, and what about you, Rachel? Wouldn't the same issues apply to Canadians as well?
It's definitely the same issues, but I do think, Canada, we are a distinct country and a distinct labor market as well. And so while you have the precedents being set in the States, and whatever happens there, it will have a ripple effect to all of the different unions around the world, particularly, obviously, the acting and the writing unions. But it's kind of similar to, say, when like Krispy Kreme and Target tried to come to Canada, and it didn't really work out for them.
Did not.
We have the same issues as the Americans did in many ways, but we are a different market. And so when it does come time for the Canadian unions to negotiate, it would be also a tricky thing to just duplicate what the Americans did, because there's a unique set of needs and demands over here as well. Totally,
because I mean, in the States, like, they're creating their own American content, right? Where here, we're such a service industry. I mean, in a perfect world, like, we come out of this in the other end and we are producing a lot more of our own Canadian content and telling our stories. But we'll just have to see what happens, I guess.
What is the impact on, I know, Rachel, you're joining us from Toronto, but, we were talking about the impact here in BC, and IATSE tells us that right now its members are working on just 4 projects in pre-production and shooting none, compared to the more than 35. I mean, you're sighing.
Yeah. I just think it's just like wild to see, because I was talking to someone yesterday that has worked in the film industry for a while, like decades, and usually there would be over 30 plus productions happening in the city, and to see that number go down to 0 or 4 is just wild.
Okay, let me get that comment from Rachel as well. What impact is it having in BC?
I mean, massive. And it's right now pretty much when the writers went on strike back in May, some productions still stayed going for, various reasons. Some of them continued shooting and pre-production, post, all those things. But now with the actors going on strike, you're basically putting a full stop on everything outside of, say, the independent studios, which can operate separate to what the AMPTP is. So it's a massive effect, and it's not just the shoots that are going right now. It is catering companies,
Right.
venues. There's tons of, especially in BC, especially in Vancouver, there's so many different industries that are adjacent to this issue that are going to they're all going to lose money. Everyone's going to lose money. People are going to have a time off. And the last time I think the writers went on strike, I think they estimated it was like about a $2 billion loss in LA alone. That was just in LA. So it's going to have a very, very far-reaching impact. But the hope is that it is not for nothing, that we are that the actors and the writers guilds are going to create, and they're going to negotiate better agreements that is going to benefit people like Jen and benefit, hopefully many, many other actors and writers down the line.
Okay. Let's talk about what this means for audiences. Monica in Penticton left a comment. There's so much TV being produced. It's hard for the audience to keep up. Couldn't producers pay actors and crews more and perhaps produce less content? Okay, so I'll ask you both, what will this mean for what viewers see? And does it mean we'll see more of those reality type shows more frequently? What do you think?
Yeah, that's, a great point. I think that the market is incredibly saturated nowadays. There's so much content, like they said, it's like less. We want maybe less quantity, more quality, Rachel? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that's the British system, isn't it? Like, you have less things going on, but they're typically better. It's typically a little bit better. But the other side of that is to think that because you're going to produce less means that there's going to be more money to pay people. That feels a little idealistic. I don't know if the studios are really going to see it in the same way. The studios will see it as, well, we're not making as much, so we can spend less. We're not going to spend the same amount for less product. And I mean, to be fair, any business would say the same thing. So it's tricky. It's tricky to when you start looking at, quantity and deciding to diminish it or rather decrease it.
So true.
Well, for the studio executives, this is the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. They said in a statement that they offered historic pay and residual increases, substantially higher caps on pension and health contributions, audition protections, shortened series option periods, and what they call a groundbreaking AI proposal that protects actors' digital likenesses and more. So that comes from a statement from the AMPTP. I'll ask you both, how far then do you think that goes, and how much further does the industry need to go to address those concerns then?
Well, from what I've heard is, this groundbreaking AI protection thing, is they're talking about taking an actor's likeness and giving them one day's worth of pay and being able to replicate their face and their likeness for perpetuity. And so to me, that seems like a bad idea for actors, and
You've got your hands on your waist there. Yeah,
I don't like it.
The actor in you is coming out.
Yeah.
Rachel, and you're shaking your head.
That's ridiculous. You can't. I don't know what they're thinking in terms of proposing that.
So is that the case then?
Idea,
that's the offer.
It doesn't make any sense to me why they would do that, because I just think not a good idea, and this is the thing when you do these labor negotiations, you do start from very, very opposing ends, like very extreme ends. And the idea is that you're going to come down eventually. So I can't imagine anybody over there actually thinks it's a good idea or that it's logical. But what they do know is that that's a starting point and they can come down from that. So, when they do propose something again, they can go, well, isn't this much better than that ridiculous thing that we proposed before? So it's all, strategy and tactics when it comes to CBA negotiations. And it's very interesting, but again, it's unfortunate that this is probably going to go on for a little while longer. And and it's like I said, a lot of people are going to be out of work because of this.
Yeah, and also really interesting to see how artificial intelligence is just making that impact on so many industries, right? Let's squeeze in Patty in Maple Ridge because Patty works in props. Hi, Patty.
Hi, how are you today?
I am okay. How are you? And how are you impacted?
Well, so both my husband and I do props and film. He's been working about 25 years and myself 17 years. We have not worked in 8 months because of this. And now I know the writer's strike only started in May.
Right.
However, it is typical to see the industry starved out before those contracts are up, essentially to make everyone more hungry to want to negotiate. I did have a small 6-week stint in the spring. That was kind of fluke. We don't anticipate any more work for 2023. And we're putting up one of our residences for sale because, when you have no income for 8 months, it hits you hard.
How hard, Patty, if you can just, I'm sorry to hear that. And you're expecting not to work for the rest of the year?
No, even when, let's say if the strike was settled today for both unions, it still takes a few months for things to get back up and running, typically about 6 to 8 weeks just for pre-production to start up and running. Mm-hmm. And then there's a lot of departments that don't get brought in until closer to filming. So even pre-production, let's say, is 3 months long, but a lot of departments won't come in till about a month before you go to camera.
Right.
So we are anticipating that. Rumors on a lot of film Facebook pages and stuff are that we could be looking at November or December.
Wow.
Before this is over. And you also mentioned, somebody had touched base on reality TV a few minutes ago.
Mm.
A lot of people might not realize reality TV was really born or really took off during the last writer's strike in 2008. That's why we saw such a huge increase in reality TV. So we could see again another shift. Maybe it's more reality, maybe it's something else. But people aren't going to notice till a year down the road when all of a sudden there's no new content coming out, much like when we had the shutdown for 6 months in Vancouver when COVID came.
And for yourself, you are putting a home on the market to make some money.
Yeah, which is really hard to do because it's also we're displacing an absolutely amazing tenant that we have in there. We tried so long to make it work. We took hits financially to make it work as long as we can, but it's essentially just come down to we have to sell. Otherwise, we could lose our primary residence.
That's really disheartening, Patty. Can you see yourself staying in the industry?
Myself, yes, it is an industry that I love. I do support the strikes as hard as it is. A lot of IATSE, a lot of below-the-line workers are going to be hit the hardest. But I think the overall sentiment is that we support these strikes because, A, they deserve it. This is all based mostly around AI and ChatGPT because on the last negotiations in 2008, it was based on streaming services, and they had said, well, it's not proven yet. We're in the same boat, but this time we know they can say it's not proven yet, but we know that it's only going to get stronger and take over more. So if they don't hold their ground now, they're never going to be able to negotiate the proper rights down the road that they need. And it's a big thing. People don't understand with AI, them being able to pay a one-day pay. There's even for background, they bring them in, they scan them, they pay for one-day pay, but then they might ask you to sign off saying, we own your likeness now, we can use it in perpetuity, or we only pay you for the one day when you might have had 4 months worth of work as background on a show. Same for actors. So these are all very big, contentious things. And although a lot of A-list actors have millions upon millions in the bank, there are so many actors that don't, and so many writers that don't get the wages they deserve. And it's because of streaming services coming in and running this as corporations and only focused on the bottom line.
Oh, Patty, I wish you all the best in your future and what comes next this year, okay? Thank you so much for calling and sharing your story.
Thank you. We're better off than most. We're lucky to be in a position we have something to sell, but I do really send my support for both unions that are on strike.
Patty, thank you very much for the call from Maple Ridge. And that is it for this segment. We have run past our news update time here, but what a discussion. And I really want to thank Jennifer Tong and Rachel Ho joining us from Toronto as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for having me.
All the best to you both. Jennifer Tong is a film and television actor based here in Vancouver. Rachel Ho is a film critic and editor at Exclaim magazine. You can send us more of your thoughts, bctoday@cbc.ca. And it is 12:35 now, 1:35 in the Mountain Time Zone. Let's pause for a CBC News update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Premier David Eby says the death of a young firefighter is a profound tragedy. 19-year-old Devon Gale died yesterday while fighting a wildfire near Revelstoke. Officials say she got trapped under a tree after getting separated from her team. A paraglider is dead after hitting the ground shortly after takeoff yesterday near Lumbee. Police say the 63-year-old was an experienced paraglider. There's no word on what may have led to the crash. And a Simon Fraser University professor and logistics researcher says it should only take a few days for backed up cargo to return to normal flow as dock workers return to BC ports. But Peter Hall says the Workers and Employers Association have a lot of work ahead on what he says are long-term structural changes. He says those should include some sort of commitment on coordinated training to deal with the onset of automation. And now the forecast: air quality alerts are covering most of the province due to wildfire smoke. On the north coast, clearing this afternoon with a high of 17. Highs reaching 25 with widespread smoke and some sunshine in the Peace. In the central interior, smoky with a high of 24. Highs to 30 with smoke and sunshine in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, smoky as well with a high of 29. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley, lots of sunshine this afternoon with highs in the mid-20s. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Michelle with BC Today.
Thank you so much, Rob. That is Robert Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. This is BC Today here on CBC. We're on Radio 1, 88.1 FM in Metro Vancouver. And online, you can catch us as well, cbc.ca/BC. You can use the CBC Gem app, or you can catch us on YouTube. Thanks so much for joining us there. It's CBC Vancouver is where you can find us. Well, every second Friday, we take your calls on pet care here on the show. And today, we get into your love of horses. Yes, BC has a special relationship with horses. Whether you see them along the highway or at a farm open to the public, or you work with horses and ride them too, they are a pleasure to see, absolutely, and interact with. We're going to hear from an expert to discuss personality traits in horses and how to encourage good habits. We also want to hear from you. Do you have a horse yourself? Do you have horses in your part of the province especially? What are your questions about horse behavior, training, or care? If you're a beginning rider and wondering how to get started, we'd love to hear from you as well. It's 1-800-825-5950, 604-669. 3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email us your question, bctoday@cbc.ca. And joining me here in studio is Shelby Dennis, a professional horse trainer and an equestrian. Hello there, Shelby.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, it's really great to have you. I have been on your Instagram page, which is SD Equus. And it's mesmerizing, I have to say. I mean, such gorgeous shots of horses. Where did your own love of horses begin?
Really young. I started riding when I was only 4 years old, but I started asking to ride when I was like 2.
Why?
So, I just
if you can remember.
My mom rode horses when she was younger, and she had little Briar horse toys that I started playing with as soon as I was a toddler. And from there, it kind of just took off, and I wanted to be a horse trainer since I was in like kindergarten. I have like old school projects where I said I wanted to be a horse trainer when I grew up.
Wow. And what are the basic things people need to know about horses' personalities and behavior?
I think that horses are super misunderstood as a species. A lot of their behavior is misrepresented both in the media and by horse professionals. We're learning more and more about them with modern day science. So I'd say the most important thing is to recognize that they're flight animals, and a lot of their behavior that we don't like to see is related to fear and stress.
Okay, so that puts pressure on them, so they have that flight reaction. When do we see that?
Anytime they feel like they're at risk. So since they're flight animals, they're naturally neophobic, which means they're afraid of new things. So they can get startled very easily. So it's within our benefit to keep training as low stress as possible so that we don't startle them.
Okay. I was sort of waving at you a little bit during the news update there because Rob was talking about the smoke and the smoky conditions in the interior and the north. That's what wanting to ask you was, we hear, of course, about all the cattle ranchers and everything like that and the horses that they keep. What impact does wildfire risk and smoke have on horses?
Just like with humans, it's not good for them to exercise in the smoke, but I'd say there are some complications where people make their living with horses. So it can be really hard to kind of juggle between having people be able to continue their work and doing what is most ethical for the horses. But when it's really smoky, it isn't in their best interest to be working them really hard.
No, what impact does that have on them physiologically?
They can get lung problems just like with people, and the harder they're working, the higher the risk is. Like, I would say you kind of have to play a happy medium between keeping them outside where it's best for them, like for their day-to-day lives, and trying to keep them safe from the smoke. But I would say that the priority should be to exercise them as little as possible when it's really smoky.
Okay, as little as possible. And you're right, it is a balance because I was reading that their body does need to move, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why is that so important?
They're trickle feeding herd animals, which means they're meant to be consuming forage like grass and hay on basically a near constant basis. Like we're talking like 17 hours a day, moving around with their heads down, grazing. So when they're not able to do that, it actually impacts their digestive system and they can get what's called colic, which is the #1 cause of mortality in horses outside of old age related death. So it's a very high risk in terms of causing potential complications or risk to life.
Okay. We would love to hear. I want to ask you as well about kind of BC's special relationship with horses. We see them, even in Vancouver, we see them in South Vancouver, right? People riding. And we'd love to hear from our listeners as well. If you keep horses yourself, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us about your own experience and what are your questions or what have you learned about horse behavior and care. Love to hear from you. It's 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. On your cell phone, it's star or pound 690. And if you are someone who does work with horses, perhaps in the north, in the Caribou, let us know too what that has been like for you when it comes to trying to deal with the wildfire risk, with the smoke too. I've been hearing how smoky it is up north in the Prince George area. So let us know what that has meant for your horses, perhaps that you use to herd cattle and all of that. I'd love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. And my guest is Shelby Dennis, who's a professional horse trainer. You described your own relationship and your own love of horses that started really very young. Is there like a special relationship between British Columbians and horses?
I think so. Like Langley, BC is the horse capital of British Columbia, so we have tons of horses. And then we also have Hastings Racetrack downtown and Thunderbird Show Park, which is, I think it's ranked #2 internationally for show jumping. So we have a lot of good horse training and horse properties here.
And for people who are beginning to ride, I have gone horseback riding in Langley, in fact, and it's really, I've probably gone twice in my life. And it's very intimidating, I have to say, but it's amazing how instinctive it is. You kind of become one with a horse as they move, right? You have to really feel them. And I remember getting startled because my horse started, I think it's streaming, and I had to really hold and you have to get your feet nice and straight and all of that. But it's amazing how you have to be kind of one with a horse as you start riding.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like, it's almost like meditative. Like, I have ADHD, and I think that working with horses really helped me with that because you have to be so focused. And I watch their behavior a lot, and I spend a lot of time monitoring what they're reacting to, what potential stressors are coming up, and it makes me focus more on the environment.
It keeps you in the moment. So that is part of a lot of therapy, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'd love to hear from people too if that's been your experience. It's 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Our regular pet segment here on the show, animal care, is what we're talking about. And so we're asking you for your own experience. What are things you want to share about the horses that you keep, that you work with, and what are your own questions as well? And so what is your advice then if it is that, you have to be really reactive and be in the moment and read your horse? But what would be your advice for someone who would like to start riding?
I would say just to try to self-soothe, self-regulate, and be calm yourself, because anytime you're stressed and feeling tense, your horse is going to feed off of that. They're very perceptive. Even when we don't realize that we're doing things, they notice the behavior. So being calm, being kind, and empathetic towards the horse, and even if they scare you, rather than reacting with frustration, anger, or fear, just try to be compassionate and recognize that they're reacting from a place of fear and stress.
Okay. And so, would you recommend taking lessons?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And how would someone even start? What would be a first lesson? What would that look like?
For me, it depends on the facility you go to, because a lot of them will start you right away with riding. For me, if I was starting out with beginner riders, I'd want to teach them behavior theory and how horses interact with the environment and what to watch for.
So you understand the behavior of the horse, first of all. It's not just you're going to get up there right now and off you go.
Yeah, exactly. Because that keeps people safe. If you can read their behavior and kind of predict when they're going to react to something, it creates safety for the person and for the horse.
Sure. And what does that reaction look like? What are things people should worry about or watch for?
So since they're flight animals, their common reactions would be flight or freeze. So when they're still and they're standing really quietly, it doesn't necessarily mean they're calm. They can be tense and staring off in the distance at a potential stressor, and then that can be the precursor to movement and flight. And the flight behaviors that we see are what make them dangerous. The falls and the injuries we see people sustain from horses are basically constantly going to be related to flight responses from the horse.
Okay. And I know you talk about being able to read that, but how do you control, or can you control the environment so they don't feel that threat to begin with?
So you can, to an extent. We can't predict everything that'll happen, but that's why it's important to keep them low stress and under threshold. So if you can start to see when they're getting elevated and then help them self-regulate and help them soothe, then you decrease the likelihood of them getting so afraid that they go over threshold and they feel the need to react. So a lot of it is preemptively trying to arrange the environment, how you train to be as low stress as possible.
Okay. And when it comes to horse training, how has that evolved, to keep that in mind? And is it in a state that it does keep that top of mind, the fact that there is that flight response?
Yes and no. I would say horse training of all animal industries is one of the furthest behind in terms of accepting science and how horses interact with the environment. There's a lot of misinformation. People misread their behaviors. They'll label stress behaviors as excitement and joy.
Why is that?
I think it's because it's so poorly regulated. There's not really standardized education that instructors have to demonstrate before they can professionally practice. And then what that means is that even if they're well-intentioned, we have a lot of these professionals who are being regarded as experts that are passing down information that isn't necessarily true. And then their students take that and they teach more people that, and it kind of just is a cycle that continues.
So what's needed to increase that education then?
I think that now that horses are no longer work animals, because I think that's also part of it, we couldn't take the time to be as considerate about their well-being when we needed them to do things for building cities and doing farm work. But now, since they're mostly pleasure animals and friends, we do have the ability to do that. So I think that it starts with people being curious, and rather than reacting to their behavior right away, pause for a moment and go, where's this coming from? Why are they doing this? And get curious about why they're engaging in a specific behavior, even if it's a behavior that you like. Just start noticing things.
I can see that you're looking at our monitor because there was that lovely shot of someone kind of nuzzling up to a horse there, just under its ear. Very nice to see. Let's take a call now. We are asking you about horse behavior and care, and then what's been your experience or interaction with horses yourself in your part of BC. Our numbers again are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And Jan is calling us from Langford. Hello there on the island. Nice to have you, Jan.
Yeah, hi there. I'm just going to click off the radio. There's my phone go down. There's a lot of Victoria area, in the greater Victoria area, there's quite a few horse, what do you call it, places to have horses, keep horses, whatever they call that.
Would that be stables or what would that?
Yeah, like boarding facilities, farm properties.
Who actually, there's a term for it. I board a horse. I had a friend of mine named Polly up in Northern Ontario. She actually is a certified therapeutic horse person, and schools would bring their troubled kids, autistic. My youngest son's autistic. I'm autistic, and brain-injured children, and they would ride the horses. She had 2 or 3 horses, and she would, had been certified, with regards to the therapeutic value of working around horses. And of course, you have a frightened child with a horse that's frightened. It could be interesting. So you really have to know what you're doing, and she did,
Sure.
and she was very, very good at it. So.
Have you tried it yourself or for your child?
I'm in BC, and my kids are in Toronto. They're 31 and 32, and they're in Toronto. So, unfortunately, there's a great golf, and the ex-wife doesn't want to talk to me. So,
Well, I appreciate your calling and sharing a little bit about your life, but also...
I need a horse. God almighty,
You need
a horse. Kingdom for a horse. Thank you.
Yeah, nice to hear from you. And yes, that is something that I've seen. I have a child with a disability, and I certainly have heard about that, right? The therapy that can provide as well. So really interesting to hear that you had that friend in Ontario who was doing that as well. Where can parents look for information on that?
There's quite a few therapeutic riding facilities in the greater Vancouver area. PRDA, Pacific Riding for Developmental Disabilities, I think it's called. That's in Langley. There's also one in Maple Ridge, I forget the name of it, and there's another one in Aldergrove area. And I also, Urban Horse Project is a charity organization that comes downtown, and they do work with horses and children.
Yeah.
And they're
Why
great.
does it help?
The horses as herd animals, like they're very interconnected with one another, and like emotional relationship is so important to their survival. So they're really good at connecting with people and like reading into your emotional state. And I think that resonates with a lot of people because they'll be able to tell, like when you're upset or sad, like they definitely can tell, and they try to interact with people. And I've noticed that with children in specific, they tend to respond to them differently than adults and get extra gentle and just, yeah, they're very sweet animals.
There's that connection there. Thank you so much, Jan, for calling us. Marianne is up next in Victoria now with a question about horse welfare and horse care. Hi, Marianne.
Hi. I was just wondering, I've been following Shelby for a while, and she's just started her campaign for horse welfare in sport. But I was just wondering if she had any ideas about what our local governing body, HCBC, and maybe just Equestrian Canada as a whole could do to help improve and protect horse welfare in sport.
That regulation you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. So I would personally start with Equestrian Canada as the main governing organization to really work on that, because they're governing the equestrian sports that we see going on in Canada. There's a lot that they can do. Their rule book does state that horse welfare is paramount and that it's very important, but they don't really have any means of measuring how they're saying what is and isn't good welfare, which makes it really hard to actually hold people accountable when horses aren't being treated correctly, because there's no real means of quantifying whether or not a horse is suffering enough to step in. So I think that one of the first steps would be to get a welfare task force involved with outside entities not involved in Equestrian Canada that are welfare professionals and equine science professionals to start quantifying what is and isn't good welfare so that they can step in when things are not going well for the horse.
Okay, so some standards needed there, and a third body, it sounds like, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Marian, thank you very much. Interesting to hear from you, as you've been following Shelby for a while now.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for the call.
Thank you.
Yeah, take care.
All right.
Let's stay in Victoria, and Karen is up next now with a question as well. Hi, Karen.
Hi, how are you doing today?
We are just fine. Thanks so much for calling in. What's your question?
And I'm wondering if your guest could speak to the issue of horses being used for the carriage trade for human entertainment. I'm concerned about their welfare, and this may link to the body that's dealing with horses in sport. Seeing them at 30 degrees when it's too hot. I took my flip-flops off, and it was too hot for me to stand on the pavement, and the horses are out there working.
For tourism, you mean?
For tourism, yeah, the horse carriage trade by the legislature, and the effect on their bodies of walking on the pavement all day.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much for the question, Karen. So what about horses in tourism? What are the standards there?
The tourist industry would be regulated separately from like Equestrian Canada and horse sports, because they are only mandating like specific sports. But with that said, like I'd say the problem there is that horses as a species are not protected by animal welfare laws to anywhere near the same extent as dogs or cats. So I think that it would come down to creating more legal grounds to hold people accountable when they're not being taken care of properly. With that said, relating to the heat on their hooves standing, horses aren't as sensitive to heat through their feet as people would be. So that would be less of a concern. I'd say the greater concern is like, how are their lives outside of their jobs? Because even if they're working, let's say like an 8 to 10 hour day, which I don't think they work quite that long, they're spending the rest of their life in their living situation. And a lot of horses are isolated from other horses. They're kept in little stalls and like really small areas when they're animals that are made to be covering like 20 kilometers plus per day. And we really need to start looking at what we determine as ethical for their lives outside of work. And the work too needs to be, it needs to have better welfare regulations for sure. But I think that a lot of the problems we see with them welfare-wise are related to how they're managed outside of work, because there's no real legal grounds for how they should be kept.
So that's what you would look at as, and that's what I guess perhaps don't see when you're on the street there. Let's quickly get Gail in Kelowna here. Hi, Gail.
Hello.
Hi there. I understand you're a veterinarian?
I am. I'm an equine veterinarian here in Kelowna.
Wonderful. What point did you want to make about horse care?
Just managing them in the especially the extreme heat, like in the heat dome a couple of years ago. Horses don't show heat stress like a dog would or a person would. They can't pant. Many of them don't sweat in extreme heat. They tend to just shut down and be really quiet, like they're resting. But they can get really hot really quickly. We actually lost horses in the heat dome just because of hyperthermia and dehydration.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. So what's needed then? Is water and shade then?
Water, shade, but some of them need hosing down. And you can also get industrial fans that are quite reasonable, under $100, and put a misting attachment on it. So with power and a hose, you can lower their shelter temperature by 10 to 15 degrees.
Gail, it sounds like we probably should have you on the show sometime.
With Shelby. Shelby, hi. You don't know me, but I've been following you.
There you go. Gail, thank you very much. I'm going to quickly squeeze in Peter. I have 1 minute left, but I'd love to hear from you in White Rock. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to thank you for talking about horses today. And I've been a past member of the BC Horse Club Association, Backcountry Horse Club Association, that teaches you how to go out into the woods with your horse.
Backcountry Horseman Society of BC, and this helps people to train people, work with ride horses and work with horses?
Ride horses out into the wilderness, and you learn how to handle horses and put them in trailers, how to take them out in the wilderness and plan your trip, how to pack up a mule or another horse behind you with boxes and all your kit and caboodle so you can spend weeks on end out in the wilderness.
That sounds like a wonderful time, Peter. So cool, Shelby says. Great to hear from you. Thanks so much. I'm glad we squeezed you in. You take care. That's Peter, joining us from White Rock with the Backcountry Horseman Society of BC. Shelby, thank you so much for your time. Nice to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Wow, really great to hear from our listeners. Shelby Dennis, a professional horse trainer and equestrian. That's it for our show today. Thanks so much to our team, Alan Regan, Miriam Gamar, Melody Jacobson, George Baker, Mel Carter, Mark Fairfield, and Greg Kisser. Thanks to Amber Palmer and David Jones. I'm Michelle Eliot. I'll be on What on Earth next week. Join me there. Amy Bell will be with you here on BC Today. Thank you so much for listening and watching.